The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind you expect in the countryside. A different kind. The kind that feels wrong. For nearly 30 years, those redwood trees had dominated the property. They were impossible to miss. Towering above the fences. Visible from the road. Older than most of the homes in the neighborhood. People stopped to photograph them. Local arborists studied them. Some experts believed they were among the rarest privately owned coastal redwoods in the region. Then one Tuesday morning, they were gone. Not damaged. Not trimmed. Gone. Every single one. Cut down. Removed. As if they had never existed. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. Maybe storm damage. Maybe an emergency order from the county. Maybe a disease nobody had warned me about. But then I saw the tire tracks. Fresh tracks. Heavy equipment. Multiple vehicles. Workers had been there for hours. And they hadn't arrived by accident. Someone had sent them. Someone had authorized the entire operation. The answer was waiting in my mailbox. A single notice. 3 pages long. Signed by the HOA president. According to the letter, the trees had been removed because they were considered a violation of community standards. A violation. $20 million worth of rare redwoods. Reduced to stumps. Because one man on the HOA board decided they didn't belong. What happened next would pull county officials, arborists, surveyors, attorneys, and eventually a judge into a fight that lasted nearly 2 years. And before it was over, one discovery buried deep inside HOA records would change the entire case. Because the board wasn't supposed to touch those trees. In fact, they had been warned not to. They had been warned not to. That sentence stayed in my head the entire night. I must have read it 50 times. Maybe more. The notice looked official. HOA letterhead. Board signatures. References to landscaping standards. But something felt off. Very off. The next morning, I drove straight to the property. The stumps were still there. Massive circles of fresh-cut wood. Some wider than dining room tables. The smell of sawdust still hung in the air. A few workers were loading equipment onto trailers. I walked over immediately. The foreman saw me coming. His expression changed the second I introduced myself. He looked confused. Then uncomfortable. Then concerned. "You own this lot?" I told him I did. He stared at me for a second, like he was trying to process what I had just said. Then he pulled out a folder. Inside was a work order. The HOA's name was all over it. Approval forms. Property maps. Instructions. Everything looked legitimate, at least at first glance. Then I noticed something strange. The parcel number on the work order wasn't mine. Not even close. The foreman noticed me looking. His face tightened. He checked it himself, then checked again. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. The workers nearby had stopped moving. They were watching too. The foreman finally shook his head. "This isn't your parcel." My stomach dropped. He pointed toward another section of the neighborhood, almost half a mile away. Different lot, different owner, different address. The work order authorized tree removal. Just not on my property. Not even remotely close. The foreman looked genuinely disturbed. He told me they had questioned the instructions when they arrived. The maps didn't seem right. The markers didn't match. Several workers had raised concerns. But according to the paperwork, the HOA president personally approved the project, and insisted everything had been verified. The foreman kept repeating one sentence. "We thought somebody had checked it." Somebody. Apparently nobody had. News traveled fast. By that afternoon, several neighbors had already heard. A few drove over to see the damage themselves. Most of them stood there in silence. One older neighbor named David had lived nearby for over 20 years. He walked around the stumps slowly, looking at each one. Then he just stopped. "You can't replace these." Nobody argued, because everybody knew he was right. You can plant new trees. You can landscape. You can rebuild fences. But redwoods that old? Those don't come back. Not in a lifetime. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting 3 days later. Attendance was packed. People filled every chair. Some stood against the walls. Others remained outside the room. The tension was obvious before the meeting even started. Several homeowners were angry. Not just about the trees. About how it happened. About who approved it. About why nobody verified anything. The HOA president arrived 10 minutes late. The room immediately went quiet. He looked confident, at least initially. Then residents started asking questions. Simple questions. Direct questions. Questions nobody seemed able to answer. Who verified the property boundaries? No answer. Who authorized entry onto private land? No answer. Why was the parcel number incorrect? No answer. The board's attorney whispered repeatedly into his ear. Every few minutes. The president spoke less and less. Then something unexpected happened. A board member stood up. A board member. Not a homeowner. Not a witness. One of their own. He looked nervous. Very nervous. He admitted he had voted against the project weeks earlier. The room became silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats. The board member continued. He said concerns had been raised before any equipment arrived. Several concerns. Questions about ownership. Questions about permits. Questions about legal authority. Questions about whether the HOA could even touch the trees. According to him, those concerns were dismissed. Repeatedly. The room erupted. People started talking over one another. The meeting dissolved into chaos. The attorney ended the session early. No votes. No explanations. No resolution. Just an abrupt adjournment. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. The following week, I hired an independent arborist. I wanted documentation. An official valuation. A detailed report. Something concrete. Something factual. The inspection took nearly 2 full days. Measurements. Photographs. Historical records. Growth analysis. Environmental review. The arborist barely spoke while working, which worried me. Experts usually explain things. He didn't. He just kept taking notes. When the report finally arrived, it was thicker than a phone book. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The estimated value shocked even me. Not because it was high. Because it was far higher than anyone expected. The trees weren't merely old. They were unusually rare. The report identified characteristics that made them significant specimens. Some had been documented in regional conservation surveys decades earlier. Others appeared in old county records. One tree may have been more than a century old. The total loss estimate climbed rapidly, then climbed again, then climbed higher. By the time the report reached its conclusion, the figure approached $20 million. The number spread through the neighborhood almost instantly. People couldn't believe it. Neither could the board. Several members reportedly thought it was a mistake, an exaggeration, a negotiating tactic, until independent reviewers reached similar conclusions. Then panic started appearing, quietly at first, then openly. The HOA's insurance carrier became involved. That changed everything. Investigators arrived. Documents were requested. Emails were collected. Internal communications were reviewed. The board suddenly stopped speaking publicly. Meetings became shorter. Statements became vague. The president stopped attending community events altogether. Neighbors noticed. Everyone noticed. Then another detail surfaced. A very troubling detail. The county planning office had records related to the property. Records going back years. Buried inside those files was a letter. A letter sent directly to the HOA. Years before the trees were removed. The letter specifically addressed the redwoods. Specifically. It identified them, mapped them, protected them, and warned against unauthorized removal. The wording was crystal clear. The HOA had no authority over those trees. None. The letter had been received, logged, filed, and acknowledged. Which raised an obvious question. If the HOA knew they couldn't touch the trees, why did they send workers anyway? That question became even harder to answer when another discovery emerged. Because the county letter wasn't hidden, it wasn't lost, it wasn't misplaced. It had been stored in a board archive, an archive accessible to multiple board members, meaning somebody almost certainly knew it existed. The moment that information became public, everything changed. The narrative shifted overnight. This no longer looked like a simple mistake. Now people were asking something far more serious. Who knew? And when did they know it? The answer appeared to be getting closer. But then one former HOA employee contacted my attorney, privately. He claimed he had seen something months before the trees were cut. Something he never reported. Something he now regretted keeping quiet. According to him, there had been a closed-door board discussion. A discussion that never appeared in official meeting minutes. And during that meeting, one specific document had been mentioned repeatedly. A document connected directly to the Redwoods. A document that suddenly could not be found. The employee insisted it existed. The board insisted it didn't. And somewhere between those two stories, the truth was hiding. My attorney immediately demanded access to additional records. What came back 2 weeks later would send the entire case in a direction nobody expected. Because buried deep inside a chain of internal emails, someone had made a statement they were never supposed to put in writing. Someone had made a statement they were never supposed to put in writing. The email was short, only a few lines. But every word mattered. My attorney called me the moment he saw it. His voice sounded different, careful, measured, like he didn't want to overstate what he was looking at. The message had been sent months before the trees were removed, long before any chainsaws arrived. Long before any work orders were approved. Long before the board claimed there had been a misunderstanding. One board official had written something troubling. Not about permits. Not about landscaping. Not about safety concerns. About visibility. Visibility. The email complained that the Redwoods blocked views from several properties. That alone wasn't unusual. Neighborhood disputes over views happen all the time. But the next sentence caught everyone's attention. It suggested finding a way to resolve the issue permanently. Permanently. The wording immediately raised questions. A lot of questions. The board's attorney tried to minimize it, called it informal language. An unfortunate choice of words. Nothing more. But homeowners weren't buying it. Neither were investigators. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere felt completely different. The room was packed again. Only this time people arrived early. Very early. Groups formed in the parking lot. Neighbors talked in low voices. Speculating. Comparing notes. Trying to understand what was happening behind closed doors. When the meeting finally started, several board members looked exhausted. One appeared unable to make eye contact with anyone. Another kept reviewing papers without turning a single page. Then something unexpected happened. One of the longest-serving board members resigned. Right there. Without warning. No debate. No discussion. Just a brief statement. Then he stood up and walked out. The room fell silent. Even the remaining board members looked surprised. That resignation changed everything. People immediately started asking why. What did he know? What had he seen? Why leave now? No answers came. At least not publicly. But rumors spread quickly. Several residents claimed the board had been arguing internally for months. Others said relationships had completely broken down. Nobody knew what was true. But everyone sensed something larger was unfolding. Meanwhile, county officials continued their review. And they weren't moving slowly. Surveyors returned to the property. Inspectors reviewed permits. Records requests expanded. The scope kept growing. Every week seemed to bring another document, another email, another inconsistency. Then the contractor's records arrived. That created a fresh problem, a major one. The contractor had maintained detailed logs, dates, times, instructions, phone calls, site visits, everything. One entry immediately stood out. According to the records, workers had paused the project on the first day, not because of equipment issues, not because of weather, because they believed they were on the wrong property. Exactly what the foreman had told me. The log showed concerns had been reported upward. Immediately. The workers didn't ignore the issue. They flagged it, documented it, requested clarification. Then came the disturbing part. Someone responded. Someone with HOA authority. The instructions were simple. Proceed. Proceed anyway. The workers followed those instructions. Now investigators wanted to know who gave them. The answer wasn't immediately clear. Names had been omitted from portions of the records. Some communications occurred through phone calls. Others through intermediaries. The trail existed, but it wasn't complete, yet. Several homeowners became furious when that information surfaced. One retired engineer stood during public comments. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. He had supported the HOA for years, volunteered, attended meetings, served on committees. Now he looked betrayed. Many residents felt the same way. Trust inside the community was collapsing. People stopped assuming mistakes had been made. Now they were wondering whether warnings had been ignored deliberately. That distinction mattered. A lot. Then came another twist. The missing document resurfaced. At least part of it. Not through the HOA. Not through county records. Through a former landscaping consultant. A man who had worked with the community years earlier. He found an old digital archive, buried among project files. The document wasn't complete. Several pages were missing. But enough remained to reveal something important. The Redwoods had been reviewed years before. Extensively. Experts had evaluated them, surveyed them, catalogued them, and issued recommendations. One recommendation appeared in bold print. No removal should occur without extensive environmental review and county approval. The wording couldn't have been clearer. The consultant turned everything over to investigators. And suddenly another question emerged. If these reports existed, why had nobody referenced them? Why did board members act as if the trees were ordinary landscaping? The pressure intensified. Then another board member resigned. 2 resignations. Within weeks. Neither man offered much explanation. Both cited personal reasons. Nobody believed that. Not anymore. Residents started demanding independent elections. Independent audits. Independent reviews. The community newsletter became a battleground. Every issue generated fresh debate, fresh accusations, fresh frustration. The HOA president remained in office. But barely. Attendance at meetings became tense. Every appearance seemed to generate new criticism. Questions followed him everywhere. Then something happened that nobody expected. The insurance carrier sent representatives to inspect the site personally. That caught everyone's attention. Insurance companies don't usually send people out unless serious money is involved. Very serious money. The visit lasted nearly an entire day. Photographs were taken. Measurements recorded. Witnesses interviewed. The representatives spoke to almost nobody. Then they left. The next week, attorneys for the HOA requested mediation. That surprised many homeowners. Especially because the board had spent months insisting it had done nothing wrong. Now they wanted settlement discussions. Privately. Behind closed doors. The request raised eyebrows immediately. Some residents viewed it as a practical step. Others viewed it differently. As a sign of fear. The negotiations began. But they didn't last. Not even close. Because during document discovery, another email surfaced. And this one was worse. Much worse. Unlike the earlier messages, this one included multiple recipients. Several board officials had received it. The subject line referenced the Redwoods directly. The contents were brief, but impossible to ignore. One recipient warned that removing the trees could expose the HOA to significant liability. Significant liability. The warning wasn't vague. It wasn't casual. It wasn't hidden. It was direct. And multiple people received it. Investigators immediately focused on what happened next. Did anyone respond? Did anyone acknowledge the warning? Did anyone act on it? The answers started appearing one by one. Some recipients never replied. Others discussed unrelated issues. But one response stood out. A single sentence. Only 11 words long. Yet potentially devastating. The writer suggested the concerns were being exaggerated. Then advised moving forward. Moving forward. Despite the warning. Despite the concerns. Despite the risks. The discovery shook the entire case. Even some homeowners who had defended the board began distancing themselves. Publicly. The atmosphere inside the neighborhood became uncomfortable. People stopped discussing landscaping. Stopped discussing community events. Stopped discussing routine HOA matters. There was only one topic now. The trees. And who was responsible? Then investigators uncovered something else. Something nobody had been looking for. Financial records. At first they appeared unrelated. Routine expenses. Routine approvals. Routine invoices. Until one payment caught attention. A payment issued weeks before the project began. The amount wasn't huge. But the timing was strange. Very strange. The invoice description was vague. Almost intentionally vague. Investigators requested supporting documents. The HOA couldn't provide them. That immediately created another problem. Where did the money go? Who authorized it? What was it for? Nobody seemed able to explain. The questions multiplied rapidly. And then, just as attorneys prepared for another round of hearings, the former HOA employee contacted my legal team again. This time he sounded nervous. Far more nervous than before. According to him, he had remembered something. A conversation. A specific conversation. One that happened shortly before the trees were removed. At the time, it didn't seem important. Now it did. Very important. Because according to his account, someone on the board had predicted exactly what would happen if the project became public. Not generally. Not vaguely. Exactly. The employee claimed the prediction matched the current situation almost perfectly. Which meant one possibility suddenly became impossible to ignore. Maybe this wasn't simply a case of bad decisions. Maybe somebody knew the risks all along. And if that was true, the upcoming depositions were about to become far more dangerous than anyone expected. The upcoming depositions were about to become far more dangerous than anyone expected. The first witness arrived looking confident. That confidence didn't last long. Within an hour, the answers started changing. Small details at first. Dates. Meetings. Who attended what? Who approved what? Nothing dramatic. Until attorneys began comparing testimony against the emails. Then the gaps started appearing, one after another. Several board members insisted they couldn't remember key discussions. Investigators weren't impressed. Neither was the judge overseeing pretrial matters. The same questions kept coming back. Who authorized the final removal? Who ignored the warnings? Who signed off after concerns were raised? Nobody seemed eager to answer. The HOA president sat for his deposition 3 weeks later. That session lasted almost an entire day. By the end, word had spread through the neighborhood. Not because anyone leaked confidential details. Because the attorneys walked out looking very different than when they entered. Focused. Serious. Almost energized. Something had happened in that room. Nobody knew exactly what. but people sensed it. Then a mini-twist changed everything. The former HOA employee who had been helping investigators suddenly backed away. His attorney advised him to stop speaking publicly. Immediately, rumors exploded. Residents assumed he had changed his story. Others feared he had been pressured. Neither turned out to be true. The real reason was more complicated. The employee wasn't stepping back because his information was weak. He was stepping back because investigators now considered him an important witness. A very important witness. That development made people even more curious. What exactly had he seen? What exactly had he heard? And why did authorities suddenly care so much? The answers remained hidden, for now. Meanwhile, the financial records continued causing problems. More invoices surfaced. More approvals surfaced. More signatures surfaced. The strange payment investigators had flagged earlier wasn't alone. There were others. Not large enough to attract attention on their own. But together they created questions. Lots of questions. One homeowner worked as a retired accountant. He reviewed publicly available records. Then attended a board meeting. When his turn came to speak, he carried a folder nearly 3 inches thick. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody wanted to. He calmly pointed out discrepancies. Missing descriptions. Unclear approvals. Incomplete records. The room became noticeably uncomfortable. Several board members avoided eye contact entirely. One left the room before comments ended. Another asked for a recess. The community had never seen anything like it. Trust was gone. Patience was gone. Even longtime supporters were demanding answers. Then investigators discovered something buried inside archived emails. Something that should have been obvious earlier, but somehow wasn't. A property survey. Not the survey used by the contractor. A different survey. An older survey. The correct survey. And according to that survey, there was absolutely no confusion about ownership. None. The property boundaries were clear. The redwoods were clearly identified. The lot lines were clearly marked. The survey had existed for years. Years. That raised a troubling possibility. If accurate records already existed, why was an incorrect parcel number used? The mistake suddenly looked harder to explain. A lot harder. The discovery reached the neighborhood quickly. Reaction was immediate. Several homeowners openly demanded the president resign. Others wanted a special election. Some wanted the HOA dissolved entirely. Meetings became tense. Security was hired for larger gatherings. Not because people were violent. Because emotions were running high. Very high. Then another unsettling detail emerged. The contractor's foreman agreed to testify. Publicly. Under oath. That decision worried several people connected to the case. The foreman had kept extensive notes. More extensive than anyone realized. Every phone call. Every instruction. Every concern raised by workers. Everything. When attorneys reviewed those records, they found something unexpected. A timestamp. A specific timestamp. According to the logs, a call had been placed immediately after workers questioned the location. The timing mattered, because it lined up perfectly with other evidence. Evidence showing concerns had already been raised internally. The sequence was becoming clearer. Too clear. The foreman wasn't speculating. He wasn't guessing. He had written everything down as it happened. That made him difficult to challenge. Very difficult. Then came another surprise. One board member who had resigned months earlier agreed to cooperate. Quietly. Without public statements. Without interviews. Without fanfare. He simply turned over documents. A lot of documents. Meeting notes. Draft communications. Internal memos. The production took weeks. Boxes of material. Digital archives. Years of records. Investigators spent months reviewing everything, and then they found something nobody expected. Not evidence of tree removal. Not evidence of property disputes. Evidence of internal disagreement. Serious disagreement. According to the records, several board members had repeatedly urged caution. Repeatedly. They asked for legal review, requested additional surveys, recommended delays. Their concerns appeared over and over again. That revelation created another twist. The board wasn't acting as one unified group. Not at all. Some members had pushed back hard. Others appeared determined to move forward. The divisions were sharper than anyone realized. The case suddenly became less about the entire board, and more about specific individuals. Individuals who kept appearing throughout the records. Individuals connected to key decisions. Individuals connected to ignored warnings. The focus narrowed. Pressure increased. Then the court set a trial date. That announcement changed the mood instantly. For months, everything had felt distant, procedural, complicated. Now there was a deadline. A real one. People started paying closer attention. Local media picked up the story. Property rights groups followed developments. Even neighboring communities began discussing it, because everyone recognized the larger issue. If an HOA could authorize work on the wrong property, what protections actually existed? The case was no longer just about redwoods. It had become a warning, a very public warning. Then settlement discussions resumed. Again, this time more seriously. The insurance carrier participated directly. Attorneys spent long hours negotiating. Numbers were exchanged. Proposals reviewed. Counteroffers made. For a brief period, many residents believed the case might end quietly. It didn't. Because during negotiations, another witness came forward. A witness nobody expected. One of the workers. A man who had been part of the removal crew. He had stayed silent for nearly 2 years. Until now. His statement wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. According to him, the crew had expressed concerns multiple times. Multiple times. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. The workers understood something wasn't right. They discussed it among themselves. Questioned it openly. The witness remembered one particular moment. A moment that stayed with him. He recalled seeing property markers. Markers that didn't match the paperwork. The crew noticed. Talked about it. Reported it. Then continued working after receiving instructions from above. The statement reinforced what investigators already suspected. Warnings existed at every stage. Before the work began. During the work. After the work. Warnings everywhere. Yet somehow the project continued. The testimony landed like a weight across the entire case. By then, even some HOA officials privately acknowledged the situation looked bad. Very bad. But the biggest shock was still ahead. A few weeks before trial, attorneys completed a final review of archived communications. Thousands of pages. Thousands. Most contained nothing important. Routine discussions. Routine approvals. Routine neighborhood business. Then one message surfaced. A message nobody had noticed before. Not because it was hidden. Because it was misfiled. The sender was familiar. The recipient was familiar. The date was critical. And the content stopped investigators in their tracks. The message referenced the county warning letter directly. Directly. Not indirectly. Not vaguely. Directly. Which meant at least one key decision-maker couldn't claim ignorance anymore. The document had been seen, read, and discussed. The implications were enormous. Attorneys immediately moved to introduce it. Opposing counsel fought back. Arguments followed. Motions followed. Hearings followed. For several tense weeks, nobody knew whether the judge would allow it. Then the ruling arrived. The evidence was coming in. Every word of it. The courtroom would hear everything. And when the HOA president learned the decision, something happened that stunned even his own attorneys. Because less than 48 hours later, he made a move nobody saw coming. A move that threatened to change the entire trial before it even began. Less than 48 hours later, He made a move nobody saw coming. A move that threatened to change the entire trial before it even began. The HOA president resigned. Not after the trial. Not after the verdict. Before either could happen. The announcement arrived through a brief statement from his attorney. No public appearance. No community meeting. No questions. Just a resignation. The reaction across the neighborhood was immediate. People stood in driveways discussing it. Homeowners filled community forums. Former supporters seemed stunned. Critics weren't celebrating. Most were simply confused. Why resign now? Why after defending every decision for nearly 2 years? The timing felt important, very important, but the resignation didn't stop the case. Not even close. The lawsuit moved forward. The trial date remained. The evidence remained. And most importantly, the questions remained. A few weeks later, the courtroom filled. Not with spectators looking for entertainment. With homeowners. Board members. Contractors. County officials. People who had spent years watching the dispute unfold. The atmosphere felt heavy. Everyone understood what was at stake. The trial began with documents. Lots of documents. Surveys. Emails. Meeting records. County correspondence. Contractor logs. Photographs. The paper trail stretched back years. And the more it was presented, the harder certain explanations became to believe. The county warning letter became a central issue. Jurors saw it. Attorneys discussed it repeatedly. Witnesses were questioned about it. The language was difficult to ignore. The HOA had been warned, clearly, directly, more than once. Then came the testimony. The contractor's foreman took the stand. His records matched his earlier statements. The details remained consistent. Questions had been raised. Concerns had been reported. Clarification had been requested. Instructions had still been given. Proceed anyway. The courtroom became noticeably quieter after that testimony. Then the worker who came forward late in the case testified. His account matched the foreman's. Different perspective. Same conclusion. Warnings existed. People noticed. People spoke up. Yet the work continued. The defense tried to argue confusion, miscommunication, administrative mistakes. Some jurors appeared receptive. At first. Then another witness took the stand. The former board member who had resigned. The one who quietly turned over records. His testimony lasted most of a day. He described internal disagreements. Repeated concerns. Requests for additional legal review. Recommendations to delay action. He explained that several members had urged caution. But those warnings never gained traction. The testimony shifted the atmosphere. Noticeably. Because now the jury wasn't hearing about concerns from outsiders. They were hearing about concerns from inside the board itself. That distinction mattered. A lot. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The email. The one investigators found late in discovery. The message referencing the county warning directly. The message that became impossible to explain away. The courtroom screens displayed it. Every juror read it. Every attorney studied it. Every witness knew what was coming next. The sender acknowledged the warning. Acknowledged it plainly. Not indirectly. Not accidentally. Plainly. That single document answered a question that had lingered for years. Did decision-makers know about the restrictions? The email suggested they did. The defense challenged the interpretation. Argued context. Argued intent. Argued misunderstanding. But the email remained. Visible. Permanent. Difficult to explain. The trial continued for days. Then weeks. Expert witnesses followed. Arborists. Surveyors. Property valuation specialists. Each testimony added another layer. Each layer strengthened the picture forming inside the courtroom. The redwoods weren't ordinary landscaping. They weren't replaceable decorative trees. They were unique assets. Rare specimens. With documented value. Documented significance. and documented protections. One expert described how long replacement would take. The answer silenced the room. Generations. Not years. Generations. That reality hit many people hard, including homeowners who had supported the HOA early in the dispute. Several later admitted they never understood what had actually been lost. Until then. Then came another twist. A small one, but important. During closing arguments, attorneys revealed that settlement opportunities had existed. Multiple opportunities. Several chances to resolve the matter before trial. Each one rejected. That detail surprised many residents. Because legal costs had exploded. Insurance costs had exploded. Community tensions had exploded. Yet chances to end the fight had come and gone. Nobody left the courtroom feeling good about that. Then the case went to the jury. The wait felt endless. Days passed. Speculation spread. Every homeowner seemed to have a prediction. Some expected a compromise. Others expected a split decision. Nobody seemed certain. Then the verdict arrived. The courtroom filled again. Every seat occupied. Some people stood in the back. Others waited outside. The jury entered. The room became silent. Completely silent. The verdict was detailed. Very detailed. The jury found that the removal occurred without proper authority. They found that warnings had existed. They found that key information had been available before the project moved forward. Most importantly, they found the HOA responsible for the loss. The courtroom remained quiet. Nobody reacted immediately. People simply listened. Then came the damages. The figures were substantial, far beyond what many residents expected. Compensation for the trees. Additional costs. Legal expenses. Other related damages. The total climbed, then climbed again, then climbed higher. Several people visibly lowered their heads. Others stared forward without moving. The consequences were enormous. Not just financially. Institutionally. The verdict changed the future of the HOA itself. Insurance coverage became a major issue. Reserve funds became a major issue. Governance became a major issue. Everything changed. The community spent months rebuilding trust afterward. New elections were held. Policies were rewritten. Outside oversight was introduced. Record-keeping procedures changed. Approval requirements changed. Property verification procedures changed. The neighborhood looked the same, but it functioned differently. The lessons had been expensive, very expensive. As for the former HOA president, his resignation didn't shield him from scrutiny. Investigations into decision-making continued long after the verdict. Several former officials disappeared from community life entirely. Others remained, trying to repair relationships, trying to restore credibility, trying to move forward. The property itself remained difficult to look at. The stumps eventually disappeared. The sawdust faded. The equipment tracks vanished. But the empty space remained. Anyone who had seen those redwoods remembered exactly where they stood. Years later, neighbors still pointed toward that section of land, still talked about what happened, still shook their heads. Not because of the money, because of how avoidable it all was. The warnings existed, the records existed, the surveys existed, the opportunities to stop existed, again and again, yet somehow nobody hit the brakes until it was too late. In the end, the case became more than a dispute over trees. It became a reminder. Property rights matter. Documentation matters. And when authority goes unchecked, even long-standing institutions can make costly mistakes. The redwoods never came back. They couldn't. But the verdict ensured something else survived. A record. A public record. Showing exactly what happens when warnings are ignored. And exactly what can happen when someone finally demands accountability. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real HOA conflicts, property disputes, and neighborhood battles with unexpected outcomes, make sure you're subscribed for the next one.